Okay, everyone, so our lesson for today is focusing on the English Civil War. So once again, our objectives and standards. Today we are going to analyze how the absolute monarchs of Great Britain clashed with Parliament that started a civil war. Here's our vocabulary preview, Parliament and the English Civil War. And our essential question, how did the monarchs and Parliament establish the background to the English Civil War? So we're going to look at what was going on that caused the English Civil War is another way to think about that question. I want you to think about this. Imagine that the President of the United States dismissed Congress and decide to act on their own with rules and laws. Okay, what would you think if the President said, you know what, I don't need Congress anymore, I'm going to do what I want, everyone has to listen to me? What would you think about that? Okay, so leading to Civil War. So Queen Elizabeth I, she had some disagreements with Parliament, and Parliament is also very upset with the Queen and her spending. So when she died in 1603, she left the country and her successor with huge debt. So James I, so Elizabeth I had no children, so her nearest relative was James Stuart, and he was King of Scotland. Now he's also going to clash with Parliament a little bit, but also mainly with the Puritan members of Parliament, who wanted some church reforms made to the religion. In 1625, James I is going to die, and his son Charles becomes king. Now Charles needs some money to fight wars against Spain and France. But when Parliament refused to grant the money to him, he dissolves it. So he basically closes Parliament and won't let them, work or discuss anything. Okay. In 1628, in order to receive money from Parliament to do what he needs to do, he's going to be forced to sign the Petition of Rights. Okay. And it has four main parts. That he would not imprison subjects or people without due clause, without what that means is proper reason or good evidence. He would not levy taxes or put taxes on people without the consent of Parliament. He would not house soldiers in people's homes, and he would not establish martial law during peacetime. So on the edge of war. So even though Charles I agreed to this Petition of Rights, he basically ignores it. The year after it, he dissolved Parliament and he imposed high taxes on the people. When he tried to impose religious views on the Scottish, Scotland threatens to raise an army and invade. So Charles I, again, calls on Parliament and says, hey, come back to work, guys, I need you, I need you. Calls them back to work, calls them into session so he can get money for war again. But Parliament decides, hold on here, that they're going to pass laws to limit his royal power. So when Parliament does this, Charles becomes furious and he tries to arrest the leaders of Parliament. Okay, so think about this again. Think if the president said, oh, Congress isn't doing what I want them to do, I'm going to arrest the leaders of Congress. Okay, it wouldn't necessarily happen today, but it did happen back then. Either way, these members of Parliament that he tries to arrest, they escape. The people of England are furious at Charles. They're very upset about what he's trying to do. And so he flees with his supporters and decides to raise an army. This is going to start the English Civil War. So Civil War comes to England. So from 1642 to 1649, England is going to be at war with itself. So it's basically the supporters of Charles I and the opponents of Charles I. Okay, the supporters are called Royalists or Cavaliers, and the opponents are Puritan supporters of Parliament or the Roundheads. They're called Roundheads because they had short hair that covered their ears. And I have a picture of it here. You can kind of see what the Roundheads kind of dressed like and looked like. Okay, there's no real winner at first. It's kind of a draw. It's kind of a tie at first, but then Oliver Cromwell becomes general, and he's going to start to turn the tide against the Royalists or the supporters of Charles I. So in 1647, Charles I is going to be captured, and taken prisoner. So the end of absolutism. So Charles I is going to be brought before Parliament, and he is going to be tried for treason. He is found guilty, and he's executed. Now, this is going to be the first time a king is executed. Obviously, kings had, died before, and people had taken their throne, or they had died in battle. But this is the first time the king is going to be executed. Okay, so this is going to basically end the period of absolutism for England with the execution of Charles I. Okay, so to wrap up this lesson, so remember we have that monarchs are acting out against Parliament. Elizabeth and James and Charles are fighting with Parliament for various issues, and when Parliament gets Charles I to sign the Petition of Rights, he's basically going to ignore it. This kind of begins the beginning stages to the English Civil War. People are going to rebel against Charles I, and he's going to flee with his supporters. And then we have the Royalists and their other name, the Cavaliers, battling the Puritans in Parliament. It's kind of a stalemate at first. There's no real winner or loser. But when Oliver Cromwell comes to lead the Puritans, they capture Charles, they take him prisoner, and he's going to be tried for treason and executed. And this is going to bring about an end to the age of absolutism in Great Britain. Next class, guys, we're going to look at the Glorious Revolution and what that means, and what comes about with changes because of that. All right, so I will see you guys then.